One you is leading them. We'll set up defenses around your palace immediately.
No. Send your troops to protect my people. Chifu.
Yes, Your Highness.
Deliver conscription notices throughout all the provinces. Call up reserves and as many new recruits as possible.
Forgive me, Your Majesty, but I believe my troops can stop him.
I won't take any chances, General. A single grain of rice can tip the scale. One man may be the difference between victory and defeat.
Quiet.
On May 4th, 1961, James Farmer leads 13 people, black and white, onto buses in Washington, D.C., bound for New Orleans. Ten days later, the bus enters Alabama, home to the largest KKK organization in America. They know the riders are coming. In Anniston, the Klan surrounds the bus, slashing its tires. Photographer Joe Postiglione captures these images. The crippled Greyhound tries to escape, but a few miles out of town, the Klan surrounds and firebombs it, with the riders still inside. The Freedom Riders do escape the bus, only to be beaten by the Klan. Joe's photos bring the Freedom Rides to international attention.
Everyone is voting for Jack, 'cause he's got what all the rest lack. Everyone wants to back Jack. Jack is on the right track, 'cause he's got...
The hard-fought presidential campaign of 1960. John Kennedy and Richard Nixon did not differ much in their moderate support for civil rights. Both candidates also looked to the white South for votes. But civil rights did become a campaign issue when Martin Luther King was arrested at a student sit-in in Atlanta. King, sentenced to 4 months hard labor, enraged the black community. Kennedy and Nixon were still wary of losing Southern white votes and avoided making public statements. But privately, Kennedy and his staff felt they had to take action.
There's Martin Luther King sitting in a county jail, and Kennedy wanted to do something, to say something. Finally, some of us had the idea that Kennedy might just call Mrs. King and express his sympathy and tell her what he was doing to get King out of jail.
He said, "I'm thinking about you and your husband, and I know this must be very difficult for you. If there's anything I can do to be of help, I want you to please feel free to call on me." And I didn't quite know what to say except to thank him and say, "Well, I really appreciate this. And if there is anything that you can do, I would deeply appreciate it."
And then that very night, Robert Kennedy called the judge in Georgia and called him to get that judge to get King out of jail.
The Kennedy phone calls proved to be a smart political move. The next day, King was released on bail. On the Sunday before Election Day, black ministers around the country endorsed Kennedy from their pulpits. It was to be one of the closest elections in American history, with John Kennedy winning by less than 2/3 of 1% of the popular vote.
Many of us felt that Kennedy's commitment to civil rights was political, that it was a device to get him elected, because in the first 6 to 8 months he had done very little. Let me illustrate that. During the campaign, he had indicated that there was one whole area of discrimination that the president could wipe out with merely a stroke of the pen, and that was the area of public housing discrimination. And if elected, he would use that stroke of the pen by issuing an executive order that would do the job. Well, we waited for more than a year for that stroke of the pen, then decided that his pen must have run dry.
The Congress of Racial Equality was determined to keep the pressure on Kennedy. CORE wanted the president to enforce 2 Supreme Court decisions banning segregated interstate travel. These Supreme Court decisions had been largely ignored throughout the South.
African Americans, since the end of slavery, have been treated in much of the country as a despised minority. They are forced to eat and use bathrooms separately from whites. James Farmer is the founder of the Congress of Racial Equality, known as CORE.
In order to understand how any Negro feels under segregation, you have to realize that from the time of infancy, he has it pounded into him that he's not as good as other people. There are things he cannot do. Don't do this, you can't do this, you can't do the other. It builds into a man a feeling of inferiority, a feeling of frustration, a feeling of resentment.
James Farmer and CORE want Kennedy to understand that segregation stains America's image around the world. CORE wants to test the Supreme Court ruling, long ignored in the South, that bans segregation in interstate travel. The plan is for black and white volunteers to ride together on buses, journeys that CORE calls freedom rides. The riders commit themselves to nonviolence,
I want you to think it over very carefully, and if you feel
believing that challenging segregation peacefully will force the authorities to act.
We would be very happy to have you embark upon this dangerous, worthwhile, significant mission.
CORE prepares the riders for the racial hatred they can expect.
Hey, you. You hear what that man said? You hear what that man said? You get back there. Get back there. Get back. Hey, come on. Come on, get him back.
In 1961, blacks were still forced to ride in the back of the bus and were shut out of the white-only waiting rooms. The administration had the power to force the southern states to obey the law through the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission. CORE dramatized the need for the government to use that power with a tactic called the Freedom Rides.
We decided the way to do it was to have a group, an interracial group, ride through the South. This was not civil disobedience, really, because we would be doing merely what the Supreme Court said we had a right to do. The whites in the group would sit in the back of the bus. The blacks would sit in the front of the bus and would refuse to move when ordered. At every rest stop, the whites would go into the waiting room for blacks and the blacks into the waiting room for whites and would seek to use all the facilities, refusing to leave. And we felt that we could then count upon the racists of the South to create a crisis so that the federal government would be compelled to enforce federal law. And that was the rationale for the Freedom Ride.
The Freedom Riders would board 2 buses in Washington, D.C. on May 4th. Their itinerary would take them through the Deep South and on to New Orleans by May 17th.
I believe the Freedom Ride started in the first week in May 1961 in Washington, D.C. As a matter of fact, on the night of May 3rd, 1961, this group of 13 Freedom Riders, 7 whites and 6 black, had a dinner at a Chinese restaurant in Washington, D.C. It was my first time having Chinese food. Someone growing up in the South and going to school in Nashville never had Chinese food. And this meal was to me, it was like the Last Supper because you didn't know what to expect going on the Freedom Ride.
The riders encountered only minor resistance as they traveled through the Upper South. On Mother's Day, May 14th, 2 buses left Atlanta for Birmingham. Outside of Anniston, a mob firebombed the lead bus and blocked the exits. 12 riders were hospitalized. The bus was destroyed. The second bus was met in Birmingham by a mob of Klansmen. Freedom Rider Jim Peck took the brunt of the beating.
This is Robert Shackney in Birmingham, at the home of a Negro clergyman. And with me are part of a group calling themselves the Freedom Riders, an interracial group traveling through the Deep South to challenge some of the segregated bus facilities in this part of the country. Yesterday, they ran into trouble. They ran into violence. Today, they say they intend to keep up their pilgrimage. Mr. Peck, you obviously have been injured. You're wearing bandages. What happened to you?
I got beaten twice yesterday by hoodlums, once aboard the bus and once in the terminal in Birmingham.
We can't act as nursemaids to agitators. I think when they learn that when they go somewhere to create a riot, that there's not going to be somebody there to stand between them and the other crowd, they'll stay home. That's been my experience with this type of individual. You see, they're always seeking the help of the police to protect them, but they are the first to criticize the police when the police are unable to protect them. And you just can't guarantee the safety of a fool, and that's what these folks are, just fools.
We had hoped that there would be protection. Indeed, that was one of the reasons that I sent a letter to the FBI. We had thought that the FBI would provide protection for us, would see to it at each stop that we were not brutalized or killed. But that did not happen.
The FBI had information, it turns out, that was quite specific about what was going to happen in Birmingham. They might have had similar information about what was going to happen in Anniston, but I'm not sure of that. But they clearly had advance information from Klan sources that the Freedom Riders were going to be attacked in the bus station at Birmingham, and that the Birmingham police were going to absent themselves and not do anything to protect the riders. The Bureau knew that. The Bureau didn't pass that information along to anybody in any other part of the department.
Corps riders boarded a plane to New Orleans after bus drivers refused to take them any further. It appeared the Freedom Ride was over. But the SNCC students from Nashville decided the ride must continue.
It was at that point, after the SNCC students from Nashville went into Birmingham, that Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, became really involved in it. Drivers walked off the job and would not drive the bus. And Kennedy got on the phone and called down to the bus terminal demanding that they find a driver. "Where is Mr. Greyhound?" he stormed. "Can't he drive a bus?"
May 20th, the new contingent of 21 Freedom Riders received word that Alabama would protect them.
8:30 Saturday morning, we understood that an arrangement had been worked out where between the Justice Department and the officials of Greyhound and the officials of the state of Alabama, where we would board the bus with other customers or passioners, and there would be 2 officials of Greyhound. A private plane would fly over the bus. There would be a state patrol car every 15 or 20 miles along the highway between Birmingham and Montgomery, about 90 miles. We got on the bus, and a great many of the riders really literally took a nap. They went to sleep. I took a seat on the front seat right behind the driver with a young man by the name of Jim Zwerg, a young white guy. I was a spokesman for this particular group of riders. And we did see the plane, but I would say about 40 miles or less from the city of Montgomery, all sign of protection disappeared. There was no plane, no patrol car. And when we arrived at the bus station, it was just an eerie, just a strange feeling. It was so quiet, so peaceful, nothing. And then all of a sudden, just like whoosh, magic, white people, sticks and bricks, killed. We were still on the bus, you know, but I think we all kind of decided, well, maybe we should go off the back of this bus, because we kind of knew that if we had gone off the back of the bus, that maybe they wouldn't be so bad on us. They wanted us to go off the back of the bus. And we decided, no, we'll go off the front and take what's coming to us. We went off the front of the bus. Jim Zwerg was a white fellow from Madison, Wisconsin. He had a lot of nerve. And I think that's what saved me, Bernard Lafayette, Alan Casey, because Jim Zwerg walked off the bus in front of us. And they were so, it was like they were possessed, because they couldn't believe that there was a white man who would help us. And they grabbed him and pulled him into the mob. I mean, it was a mob. When we came off the bus, they were so, their attention was on him. It's like they didn't see the rest of us. For like about maybe 30 seconds, they didn't see us. They didn't see us at all. And we were hemmed up by this rail. There's a rail right there at the bus station. Parking lot down below. Cars down there. And then when they did turn toward us, we had a choice. About 10 or 15 feet below. We could stand there and take it, or we could go over the rail. Over the rail we went. Me and Bernard Lafayette. Alan Casey always carried his little typewriter. Always had his typewriter. Over the rail he went. On top of a car. Hit the ground, took off, ran into the back of this building. It was the post office, and the people were in there carrying on the business of just like nothing was happening outside. But when we came through that, and our mail went to flying everywhere because we were running.
As I drove along, I saw two young women who were Freedom Riders being pummeled to one side. There was a woman who was walking along behind one of these young women. She had a purse on a strap, and she was beating her over the head. And a young, skinny, blonde teenager in a T-shirt was sort of dancing her backward in front of her, punching her in the face. Instinctively, I just bumped up onto the sidewalk, blew the horn, jumped out of the car, came around, grabbed the one who was being hit, took her back to the car. The other young woman got in the back seat of the car, and I opened the door, pushed this young woman whose name I think was Susan Wilbur, and said, "Get in the car." And she said, "Mister, this is not your fight. I'm nonviolent. Don't get hurt because of me." I almost got away with it. If she'd gotten into the car, I think I could have gotten away. But that moment of hesitation gave the mob a chance to collect their wits. And one grabbed me by the arm, wheeled me around, and said, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, "Get back, I'm a federal man," turned back to her, and the lights went out. I was hit with a pipe over this ear.
We heard the news about Jim Zwerg, about John Lewis, about William Barbee. William Barbee was damaged for life, really. Jim Zwerg for life. It's amazing that they're still living. They could have been killed.
Segregation must be stopped. It must be broken down. Those of us who are on the Freedom Ride, who will continue the Freedom Ride, I'm not sure that I'll be able to, but we're going on to New Orleans. No matter what happens, we're dedicated to this. We'll take hitting, we'll take beating. We're willing to accept death
we're going to keep coming until we can ride from anywhere in the South to any place else in the South without anybody making any comments, just as American citizens.
Despite Floyd Mann's personal efforts, Montgomery police did not protect the riders. Robert Kennedy now ordered United States Marshals into Maxwell Air Force Base outside Montgomery.
As soon as the federal government is shown that by action that the state of Alabama can deal with law enforcement on their own, the U.S. Marshals will be out of there.
I think that the federal government's position has been one which has encouraged these outside agitators to come into our state. And this encouragement has helped create the problem that we've got here. Now the federal government comes in here and illegally interferes in a domestic state matter, in a matter which they themselves have helped create.
That weekend, while 600 marshals took their positions, Martin Luther King flew in to lead a rally at the First Baptist Church. Sunday night, most of the leadership of the civil rights movement gathered in support of the Freedom Riders. On the streets, an angry mob surrounded the church, threatening all those inside.
We've had an ugly mob outside. They have injured some of the federal marshals. They burned some automobiles. But we are not giving in for what we are standing for. And maybe it takes something like this for the federal government to see that Alabama is not going to place any limit upon itself. It must be imposed from without.
King telephoned Robert Kennedy to report on the escalating violence. Kennedy called Governor Patterson demanding protection. The governor replied that he could not guarantee the safety of Martin Luther King. Tear gas from the battle outside began seeping into the church.
The first thing that we must do here tonight is to decide that we aren't going to become panicky. That's right. That we're going to be calm, and that we are going to continue to stand up for what we know is right, and that Alabama will have to face the fact that we are determined to be free. The main thing I want to say to you is fear not.
That's right.
We've gone too far to turn back. Let us be calm. We are together. We are not afraid. Amen. And we shall overcome.
That's right.
So just, yes.
Wait 1 minute. It is a sin and a shame before God in a day like this that these people who govern us would let things come to such a sad state. But God is not dead. The most guilty man in this state tonight is Governor John Patterson.
At 2 a.m., with the outnumbered federal marshals barely holding the line, Governor Patterson declared martial law and ordered in state police and the Alabama National Guard. The Kennedys had not been forced to send in an invading federal army. These troops were Alabama's own. The people in the First Baptist Church were safe. It had all happened quickly. In little more than 2 weeks since the rides began, the federal government, and now the state of Alabama, had been forced to protect the constitutional rights of the Freedom Riders. Montgomery, May 24th. Just 2 days after the siege at the First Baptist Church, Alabama Guardsmen were deployed around the Montgomery bus terminal to protect 27 Freedom Riders leaving on 2 buses for Jackson, Mississippi.
That ride from Montgomery to Jackson was like a military operation. Now, as we rode on the bus, there were Alabama National Guardsmen on the bus with us, about 6 of them, with bayonets fixed on their rifles. There were helicopters chopping around overhead. There were police cars screaming up and down the highway with their sirens blaring. We got to the border between Alabama and Mississippi and saw that famous sign, "Welcome to the Magnolia State." And our hearts jumped into our mouths. And there were Mississippi National Guardsmen flanking the highway at this point, with their guns pointed toward the forests on both sides of the road. And the bus proceeded on into the environs of Jackson and then Jackson. Now, as we got to the suburbs of Jackson, one of the Freedom Riders broke into song. And this was as it had to be. I can't sing. I wish I could. But his words went something like this. I'm taking a ride on the Greyhound bus line. I'm a-riding the front seat to Jackson this time. Hallelujah, I'm a-traveling. Hallelujah, ain't it fine? Hallelujah, I'm a-traveling down Freedom's main line.
I was read in the news, the Supreme Court had said, listen here, Mr. Jim Crow, it's time you were dead. Hallelujah, I'm a-traveling. Hallelujah, ain't it fine? Hallelujah, I'm a-traveling down the Freedom's main line. I'm taking a ride on the Greyhound bus line. I'm riding the front seat to Jackson this time. Hallelujah, I'm a-traveling. Hallelujah, ain't it fine? Hallelujah, I'm a-traveling down Freedom's main line.
In Jackson, there was only police. Outside the terminal, inside the terminal. As we walked through, the police just said, keep moving. They let us go through the white side. We never got to stop. You know, they just said, keep moving. And they passed us right on through the white terminal into the paddy wagon and into jail. There was no violence in Mississippi.
Attorney General Robert Kennedy had made a deal with Mississippi authorities. He would not enforce the Supreme Court decision giving the riders the right to use any public area in the bus station. In return, Mississippi would make sure there was no violence. Kennedy avoided bloodshed, but by giving in to Mississippi's segregation laws, he put the Freedom Riders at the mercy of the local police and local judges.
The next day after we were arrested in Jackson, we went to court. Prosecutor got up, accused us of trespassing, took his seat. Our attorney, Jack Young, got up to defend us as human beings having the right to be treated like human beings. While he was defending us, the judge turned his back, looked at the wall. When he finished, the judge turned around, bam, 60 days in the state penitentiary. And there we were, on the way to Parchman. Maximum security.
After the first arrest on May 24, 1961, Freedom Riders continued to pour into Jackson. By summer's end, 300 had been arrested and sentenced.
You're under arrest. Get their name.
That same summer, Robert Kennedy petitioned the Interstate Commerce Commission to issue regulations banning segregation in interstate travel. In late September, the commission complied. The students had won their victory, and they had become a major force in America's civil rights movement, experienced in direct action and its consequences.
In the penitentiary, Parchman, we were only allowed one book. That was the Bible. So we did a lot of singing, praying too, but a lot of singing. And those folks just couldn't understand how we could be happy singing. So they would say, shut up. shut up. And the women, we could hear the women on the other side, they sing to us and we sing to them. So they came through and said, well, if you don't shut up, we'll take your mattresses. That didn't bother us, we kept singing. So they came through, they took our mattresses. I let my mattress go, everybody let their mattress go. Next night they gave us our mattresses back. So we start singing again. They threatened us again. We will take your mattresses, and you have to sleep on that steel without a mattress. And that steel was cold, and you only had a pair of shorts and a little T-shirt on. We kept singing freedom songs. Freedom's coming and it won't be long. They came through a cell block. Stokely Carmichael was my cellmate. I told Stokely, I'm not letting my mattress go. Everybody peacefully let their mattress go. But I remember the night before when I had to sleep on that steel. So they came in to take my mattress. I was holding my mattress. They drug me out into the cell block. I still had my mattress. I wouldn't turn it loose. And one of the inmates, they would use the black inmates to come and get our mattresses. I mean the inmates, you know. And there was this guy, Pee Wee, they called him. Short, muscular. Oh. They said, Pee Wee, get him. Pee Wee came down on my head, man. Whoa, whoa. He was crying. Pee Wee was crying. I still had my mattress. That's when you remember when your parents used to whip you and say, it's gonna hurt me more than it hurt you? It hurt Pee Wee more than it hurt me.